Hello, this is Rocky Marciano. When I was heavyweight champion of the world, they called me the Brockton Blockbuster. You find out why.
Welcome to the Rocky Marciano Archives, a channel dedicated to the life and career of the immortal champion. The subject of this longer-than-usual upload is Marciano opponent Johnny Pretzie. We pivot on the meeting between the pair on the evening of March 21st, 1949. A few episodes back, we related how, due to the majority not listening until the end, and listening is how these uploads are geared towards, we would make shorter, bite-sized pieces. Well, that didn't work either, as very few made it to the end on that one. So, in for a penny, in for a pound, as they say. From now on, this channel will revert back to full courses, as it were, and leave you to decide if you wish to devour every crumb. So, on with the upload. We really do hope you give yourself a chance to get something out of this. Pleasant listening. Like many of his early opponents, Johnny Pretzie has become a mere biographical footnote in the rise of Rocky Marciano. At first glance, the only distinction this fighter seems to hold is the fact that he lasted into the 5th round against the man who was being hailed now as the Massachusetts Man-Eater, Brockton Strong Boy, Sir Punch, or the Blockbuster from Brockton. This last title had not yet been morphed into the more famous Brockton Blockbuster. That would come later. Yet, akin to all the names on the roll of victories, Pretzie was far more than a mere footnote. This Boston-based heavyweight, who due to his incredibly hairy physique would be described by some as a werewolf, held a unique distinction in the annals of boxing, for he was the only man to enter the competitive ring against both a relatively young Rocky Marciano and an equally relatively old Jake LaMotta. His bout with the mythical Raging Bull in 1954 would prove to be amongst one of the latter's most controversial fights in a career of controversy. The fight dragged Pretzie to his lowest point in a sport he had committed himself to since childhood, whilst, conversely, Johnny's appearance against Marciano on the night of March 21st, 1949, would be close to the pinnacle of his career, at least in the professional boxing ring. Pretzie, to quote the St. Petersburg Times of April 26, 1943, was of Armenian parentage and born in Cambridge, Mass. He was a four-letter boy at Watertown High School, attended Providence College and Northwestern University a short time, and received an offer to be an athletic coach at Iowa State University, but was unable to accept. A great halfback at Watertown, he was offered a football scholarship at several colleges. He played first base in the Boston Park League and became a subject for Diamond Scouts. Despite his seemingly all-round athletic ability, Johnny Pretzie, born John Pretzian, decided to turn his attention to boxing, basing himself in Boston, where he proved something of an amateur sensation. St. Petersburg Times again. After mixing in several minor gloves events, Pretzie first came to general notice back in January 1940, when, by a one-round knockout over Walter Stroh of Wilmington at Boston Arena, he won the chance to compete in the annual state championship. He dropped the title on points, however. As a member of the Boston crew in an inner-city tourney in May 1940 at the arena, Pretzie competed as a heavyweight but again failed to emerge. Then, determined to climb up in the fistic world and irked at losing his 2 important first fights, losing does not appeal to him, Pretzie began his streak of 25 wins. In the 26th in the Golden Glove Championships at the arena, he hurt his hand with a vicious left hook that eliminated Estorino Cimeno of Providence in the semifinals, but at the same time eliminated himself. He was forced to default to Howard Thompson, class victor, because of the smashed bone, which caused for the insertion of a bone plate. Pretzie was discouraged and out of competition for some time due to that injury. He damaged his hand again when he swung back through the ropes too quickly. But he won a decision by sheer courage over Pete Lauthis, former Buffalo National amateur champ who had trimmed an All-American. In the New England All-American Championship in November, 1942, at the Boston Arena, Pretzie scored a sensational KO over Paul Conley, South Boston former Grand Nationals champ and holder of several titles. Pretzie timed one punch wrong in that heavyweight wind-up and nearly broke his thumb. It swelled to 3 times its average size, and all that with the Eastern All-American Finals coming up. However, putting Conley out of the running in 2 rounds gave Pretzie the chance to compete in the All-Eastern Finals at the Garden, where he trimmed Wally Verbanek of Cleveland in the semis and stopped 250-pound Chuck Jennings of Buffalo in 2 rounds to win the All-Eastern title. Pretzie was fighting at 187 pounds then. He tips the scales at 195 now. Pretzie then became the amateur king of SWAT and realized an ambition. His terrific left won him the All-American crown. When he met the big fellows in the wind-ups at Boston Gardens last December, Pretzie KO'd Charlie Riggs of Pittsburgh in 1 round and knocked out Eddie Kaminsky of Chicago to capture the belt. During his tumultuous amateur career, Johnny achieved some 33 knockout victories in 35 successful bouts, 26 in a row helped by his lethal left hand. During this concussive string, Pretzie seemed in no rush to turn his attention towards the paid ranks. Instead, he made his living by working as a welder at a local Boston shipyard. That is until the spring of 1943, when he was called to serve his country. He enlisted in the U.S. Army Air Corps Reserve at the rather advanced age of 22, serving out his time in St. Petersburg with the 603 Training Group. By the fall of 1945, he was back on the streets once more and planning to emulate in the professional ring that which he had achieved in the amateurs, namely an unprecedented string of knockouts. At the outset, he looked as if he would do just that. William Bell, Charlie Lomsky, and Clifford Mann all capitulated and fell in short order. It seemed that Johnny was advancing fast. The fight against Mann was a headline 10-rounder before Pretzie's home crowd at Boston. For such a novice fighter to be headlining was almost unheard of. Pretzie, however, seemed to be a crowd-pleasing fighter who shared a similar style with Marciano. He would later be compared both facially and in build to the Brockton fighter. At least this was the perception, as witnessed by an article in the New Hampshire Plymouth Herald on the morning of November 17, 1945. Despite his 3rd straight knockout in as many professional starts, followers of Johnny Pretzie were convinced today that the hard-punching Boston heavyweight needs plenty of polish before meeting any of the higher-ranking sluggers. Pretzie was outclassed by Cliff Mann before he connected with a series of left hooks that dropped the New Yorker 3 times in the 3rd round. It seems the fans saw the writing on the wall. In Johnny's very next fight, he was stopped in the 10th and final round by J.D. Turner. However, in a rematch, Pretzie gained revenge, knocking him cold in the 6th, and for a while at least, it appeared that he had got his career back on track. But he hadn't. He entered the ring 10 times after his revenge victory over J.D. back in 1946 and immediately prior to his meeting Marciano in 1949. Of those 10, he lost 5, including to former Marciano conquest James Patrick Connolly. He did, however, manage to gain a victory over another shared opponent in the form of Bill Hardiman, whom Rocky had starched in the 1st. Johnny took the full 6 rounds to gain a win on points. By the night of March 21st, Pretzie's star had started to wane. However, due to his sensational amateur career, there were those who still had faith in this Boston boy. After all, he had won his last 2 outings in a row. This night against Marciano would be seen as the 3rd try on his perceived comeback into prominence. Indeed, many felt prior that Weil was making a mistake in pitting his fighter against a man with so much experience, someone who still carried undoubted power in his own 2 fists, especially as Marciano was still plagued with the nagging insecurity over his own brittle hand. "I was wary of this fight," commented Sam Silverman. "I really thought Johnny had a chance to stop the ride, and I told Weil so. I seriously thought this was a major test for the kid. I honestly thought he would lose." For the first 4 rounds, it seemed Silverman was to be proven right. This was to be Rocky Marciano's first main event at the Rhode Island Auditorium in Providence, and the first in which he would be paid on percentage of the gate rather than a straight sum, a sign of his growing popularity. After 9 previous appearances, the crowd finally got their chance to see their adopted favorite top the bill, and what a wild night they had. The fight was scheduled for 10. No one believed for a moment that it would go that far. In the first 2 rounds, Pretzie, who had, it is alleged, taken the bout at 3 days' notice for a paltry $500, proved his gameness as he battered the over-eager Marciano. Punch after punch connected to Rocky's unprotected jaw, the crowd roared. They expected a knockout in this fight, but then they always did when Marciano was in the ring. This time, however, it looked as if it would be Marciano who would fall. Recalled Pete Fuller, who was in Pretzie's corner for this bout. Johnny really handed it to Rocky in those first 2 rounds. I really thought that my kid was going to knock the guy out. Yet the Brockton fighter took all that Pretzie had to offer and began to trade with the older man in the 3rd, at the end of which an exhausted Pretzie sat dejectedly in his corner. It appeared that, buoyed by his 2 successive victories, plus the alleged slurs being slung at him by Al Weil in the opposite corner, that Ali Colombo, for one, felt were giving the guy extra motivation. The Cambridge native felt assured of another win this night, and after being appraised of his opponent's ability to end bouts quickly, had decided to take the fight to him. The problem was that in so doing he had expended himself to the limit. Now it appeared almost as if he was willing to do the unthinkable. He was willing to quit. Jackie Martin, his soon-to-be ex-manager, pleaded with him not to. If he did not go out for the 4th, he would forfeit his pay. He would leave with nothing. Grudgingly, Pretzie continued on. In the 4th, Rocky took over completely. The rust which had accumulated over the previous 3 months finally fell away, much to the relief of his corner, which included the aforementioned Al Weil. Goldman admitted later that he had been nervous when I saw Rocky taking all those punches, but the fact that he took them and came back showed the kid's heart. As Marciano began to bang away at the fast-fading Bostonian, Al Weil again showed his almost sadistic side as he giggled like a schoolgirl at Pretzie, who had started to fall apart. Finally, after over 2 minutes of continuous punishment, he finally fell, more through exhaustion. Pretzie managed to make it to his feet, which proved his gameness after he had almost ended the battle himself, whilst sat on his stool at the end of the 3rd. But in hindsight, perhaps he should have stayed there. The 5th round was the final straw. Pretzie was hammered to the canvas 3 times before referee Dolly Searle had seen enough, calling a halt to the massacre at the 1 minute and 46-second mark. Marciano had won, yet he had been forced to go farther in a ring than he ever had before. Plus, all agreed he didn't look pretty doing it. But then Marciano never did. At least Johnny had finally walked away with his pride. To all those who knew him, it was almost inconceivable that he had been so close to quitting, for he was regarded as a tough, rough house fighter, one who relished the chance to do battle. This last fact was eventually proven by the amount of times he got up to face the hammering fists of Marciano. There would be other nights for him in the future, his fans believed, where he could rebuild his career despite his age. He was born in 1920. Initially, though, Pretzie seemed to suffer from the fate dealt most opponents who had the misfortune of facing the man that reminded author Wilfred Diamond of a bulldozer wading into a hillside. Of his next 5 fights, he lost them all, 4 inside the distance, yet by late 1951, he had begun to experience a brief renaissance. He did not win all these bouts, but he did gain the reputation as something of a spoiler. First, he defeated Lee Oma, a highly regarded heavyweight who had, in his previous bout, challenged for the World Heavyweight Championship. Next, to prove that he still had dynamite in his gloves, he knocked out the durable and underrated Pat Comiskey, who had been campaigning at the highest level for nearly a decade. But by far his greatest triumph had been over Jeff Dyer, an up-and-coming young fighter who had previously defeated him. Dyer had lost only twice in his short career and was touted to go all the way by those who had seen him in the ring. Despite his triumphs, however, he was eyed as nothing more than a convenient stepping stone, someone with name enough to mean something. Yet this stepping stone cracked young Jeff into unconsciousness by the end of the 7th round. For Johnny Pretzie, this was his last hurrah. Over the next 3 years, he would stave of defeat just twice more, both in 1954, which led to his most inglorious moment against Jake LaMotta. The Pretzie-LaMotta match was made for the 11th of March, 1954, at the Legion Arena, West Palm Beach, Florida. From the moment the bout was scheduled, there were eyebrows raised from within the fight fraternity. Pretzie was some 25 pounds heavier than LaMotta, who had once won the World Middleweight Championship after defeating a one-armed Marcel Cerdan back in 1949. He had managed to keep a tentative hold of the title for 2 tempestuous years before losing it to the incomparable Sugar Ray Robinson in a bloody brawl known forever after as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, February 14, 1951. LaMotta and Robinson were no strangers to each other. In fact, this was their 6th and final meeting. Incredibly, LaMotta had actually beaten his foe in their 2nd encounter. The image of a lithe Robinson being hammered through the ropes by a young, prime, aggressive LaMotta is an indelible one. Controversy surrounded LaMotta all his life. He claimed that in order to get his much-deserved shot at the championship he so craved, he was forced to throw a fight against the inferior Billy Fox. Later, he would be consistently hauled before the New York State Athletic Commission on charges of not trying against opponents, which left an indelible stain on what could have been a glorious career. Again, in the bout with Pretzie, there would be such charges by the Florida Boxing Commission. This time, however, they were directed at his opponent. In the bout itself, Johnny hit the floor no less than 6 times before the referee stepped in during the 4th round. Many thought something stank. Pretzie's purse was held up. The fans and Florida Commission felt that Pretzie kept falling down. Not one of LaMotta's punches, most agreed, had seemed to land flush. The cry of "fix" reverberated around the arena, and there seemed to be an argument for this when it emerged. Pretzie was actually earning some small change as a strong-arm man for the mob. The claims eventually came to nothing, but for both fighters, this was the end. LaMotta fought only twice more before retiring for good later that year. As for Pretzie, this was his last bout. He never entered the ring with gloves on again. He was not through with boxing, however, for he continued on as a trainer for several years, whilst earning a living by doing that which was the calling of most boxers who failed to keep their earnings from the ring, namely variously enforcer, security guard, or bouncer. Pretzie tried his hand at them all as he wandered through life until 1989, when, at the age of 68, he fell into an argument with an off-duty housing police officer in a Boston bar. The pair went outside, where Pretzie wanted to settle the dispute with his fists. The off-duty officer, perhaps aware of the old man's reputation, decided to pull his gun. Whether by accident or design, there was a bang, a flash, and Johnny Pretzie fell dead. It was a tragic end to the life of a remarkable man who had skirted so close to the edge of greatness. Alas for Johnny, he found that he missed that one vital ingredient which elevated his former opponent, Marciano, into the stratosphere and left Pretzie, quite literally, looking up. If you are hearing this, we all at the Archives genuinely thank you. We will look deeper into the remarkable lives of other Marciano footnotes as we continue to meander along Rocky's early career. Each opponent the champion faced on his rise to greatness has their own story to tell, their own broken dreams of greatness usually shattered by Marciano himself. So let Rocky's actions after the bell rang and the fighting ended be our inspiration in ensuring we do not allow these names to be forgotten. For Rocky not only kept close to many of those he beat down, but in several cases worked hard to ensure their lives were made a little better. But those stories are for another day. Until the next time, we will see you down the road.
If you like this content, then hit the subscribe button. To really support this channel, consider joining for just over $1 a month and unlock ad-free members-only content. Every member will play a key part in revealing the real Rocky.
As soon as the bell rang, it was a completely different person going out there, and I couldn't explain it except I just enjoyed combat. I just enjoyed the sport that I had learned so well, and I had practiced so much that when the bell rang, I did a job. I could concentrate on the opponent. The fight itself was strictly to prove myself as a fighter. I had to prove that I was a better man.